shifts and produces either new insights or new solutions, the world must now make rapid progress towards low or no carbon means of supplying energy. Unavoidably, humankind will have in due course to meet its energy needs either by harnessing the power of the sun, or the gravitational pull of the moon, or the turbulence of the weather, or the heat in the earth, or the awesome energy locked into every atom in the microsecond that the universe was first created. In the foreseeable future, however, it is hard to imagine anything other than that we will all remain hungry for energy. And the minister gave us some chilling statistics. Yes, we can be far more energy efficient, but the notion that we will be able massively to reduce our energy needs appears to me to be fanciful and at odds with all evidence. We are not going to want to stop seeing at night, or to be warm in winter, or to travel for business or for pleasure. It is likely, however, that the cost of producing energy from non-carbon sources will be high, that the price of energy will rise substantially, and that its use will become ever more a luxury. Britain cannot be proud of its progress on energy issues, not just over the last decade, but I would suggest over the past few decades compared with other leading countries. We are laggards in nuclear power, having allowed our capacity to diminish and not to grow, and we are near to the bottom of the hierarchy of nations embracing renewables. As a result, in the short term, we have no choice but to burn even more of the world's finite and diminishing stocks of hydrocarbons to supply Britain's future energy needs. And we will remain, for at least the medium term, net importers of energy, with weak hedging of national risk against the incalculable vicissitudes of a troubled world. We are far too exposed, as the noble Baroness Lady Wilcox reminded us, and have not managed our energy security risk prudently. This bill is a welcome step, but it is a small step on the way to a position of which we can be more proud. But I suspect, and this note has already been struck by others, we will need to return to these issues again and again in coming years before we attain a steady equilibrium. First, we shall have to establish that the government's framework for nuclear offers sufficient incentives for resurrection and for growth. Nuclear brings attendant risks, as we all know, which are significant and must be managed. But nuclear must nonetheless be a major source in the future of our and the world's energy needs. The energy market untrammeled would just produce black smoke. If we want an energy policy which meets our environmental and security objectives, self-evidently governments have to intervene, and we shall have to pay far more for our energy. Subsidy is hardwired into the system. In nuclear, we have to hope that the government's hands-off policy in passing almost all the risk to the private sector will work, and that it will lead to a substantial growth in nuclear power. But if it does not, we shall have quickly to think again and to consider if the government needs to shoulder more of the risk, and particularly the risk of future governments adding to the cost of owning nuclear plant. As for renewables, it is very hard indeed for me, if possible, to see how Britain can meet Europe's and our own targets or even come close to them. And that should concern us because those targets are not now plucked from the air but rooted in the science. There are, beyond government's reach, important reasons why our progress in meeting our renewable energy targets will be slow. Some of the renewable technologies, for example, offshore wind or biomass, are still not robust, though I'm sure they soon will become so. And some of the technologies, as the noble Lord Reedsdale reminded us, are tried and tested, but they're experiencing worldwide demand, so there are now very significant supply bottlenecks. But there are many other impediments in the way of reaching our renewable targets that the government can affect. First, our planning regime is very costly for renewable energy suppliers and generally moves at a snail's pace. We have to hope that the new proposed planning legislation will enable a more timely and cost-effective means of reconciling competing global, national and local objectives. Second, agencies of government, particularly the MOD as well as other public agencies, need to curb their understandable instinct to object, except on the most material of grounds. Third, our onshore grid was designed for a different power era, and we need to inject some urgency into ensuring access for highly dispersed renewable energy providers. Fourth, government must be wholly reliable in setting down and keeping to the economic framework it sets if investor confidence is to be maintained in this sector. If the April 2009 date for the new renewable regime were to slip, for instance, it would wholly undermine many investment projects undertaken already underway on the reasonable assumption that it would not. Fifth, compared with best practice in other countries, our incentives for renewable heat don't match those for renewable power. As a result, an enormous amount of heat from our power stations and from our large plants escapes into space, and when it could be used to supply, as others have already suggested, neighbourhood heating systems. Sixth, and again, unlike some other countries, we lack a system of feed-in tariffs for micro-generators of renewable power. This bill, I'm sorry to say, addresses only some of these issues. And given the disproportionately high burden overall that EU renewable energy targets will place on renewable electricity generation in the UK, and given also the gulf between where we need to be and where we are, it is hard to escape the conclusion that the government will need to revisit its renewable energy policy even before the ink is dry on this bill. Finally, in respect of renewables, I think policy in the next phase may need to focus even more on the natural advantages enjoyed by the British Isles. As the main bulwark against the fierce North Atlantic, a high proportion, as we know, of Europe's wind blows across our shores. For the same reason, we are buffeted by powerful ocean waves. And with a huge and complex island coastline, we have access unparalleled in Europe to the push and pull of tidal forces. We have a national interest, therefore, in ensuring, if it can be done, that economic technologies for harnessing these energy sources are developed as quickly as possible. My lords, as we all understand, however, progress on the national front is not a sufficient condition of real progress on climate change. We will only resolve the issue of burgeoning carbon emissions across the planet if we act globally. And that means, above all, that the EU, the US and other rapidly developing countries must come together and put a global and ever-reducing cap on carbon and institute a regime of carbon pricing and trading. As a nation, we must do all we can to foster that coming together. But we will only have the moral authority to lead that debate, let alone a moral compass, if we put our own house in order first. My Lords, this bill is a welcome step on the way, but we have a very long journey ahead of us.
Very good.
Taking part in this debate, I wish to declare my relevant